welcome to Question Dine, the show where our prospective parliamentary candidates sit down for dinner with our volunteers to discuss the big political ideas of the day. My name's Luke Gittos and I'm your chair, and we're coming to you here from the E5 Square Cafe in Hackney, East London. And the election has started. While there seems to be a tremor of excitement, at least from the mainstream newspapers, what seems to be missing is a real sense of any direction to any of the mainstream political parties, any radical sense of how society should be taken forward. And as a result of this, the themes that seem to be emerging seem to be consensus, cooperation and concession. Well, any of you who have seen Question Time before will know that we're not too into that. So before we get involved in a good old-fashioned row, why don't we meet our contributors?
My name is Brendan O'Neill. I'm the editor of Spike Online, which is a radical humanist online magazine. We're not supporting any of the parties in the election at all, but we are engaged in the election, and we're particularly interested in issues such as freedom, democracy, militarism, and lifestyle, and we want to make sure that these important issues are discussed in their own right, rather than pushed aside by parties squabbling over small issues.
My name is Andrew Boff. I'm a member of the Greater London Assembly. I'm not running for Parliament, curiously enough, but I am running for to be the elected mayor of Hackney. I've had a long old history in the Conservative Party. I used to be a leader of a borough council many years ago, and currently I'm Boris Johnson's ambassador for cycling. Unfortunately, I drove here today, so I'm not very good advert for that. And I'm also the Conservative group spokesperson on the Olympics.
My name is Diane Abbott, and I'm the Labour Party's prospective parliamentary candidate for Hackney North for the Stoke Newington.
I'm Keith Angus. I'm the Liberal Democrat prospective parliamentary candidate for Hackney North and Stoke Newington.
So why don't we meet our volunteers?
Hi, my name's Lauren. I'm a WORLDwrite volunteer. I'm currently unemployed and looking forward to tackling some issues about youth unemployment today.
My name is Philip. I live in North London, in Hendon. I'm interested in the forthcoming election and less about politicians and more about policies and people.
Hi, my name's Adila. I'm 16 years old and I'm still in school. I live in this area, Hackney, and I'm also a WORLDwrite reporter.
My name is Victoria. I'm 16 too. I'm also a Hackney girl, and I'm an A-level student, and I'm a WORLDwrite volunteer.
My name's Naomi. I'm a Hackney resident. I'm 22. I'm currently working as a waitress but looking for other employment, and I'm a WORLDwrite volunteer.
I'm Salaha and I'm a volunteer coordinator at WORLDwrite.
My name's Hina, I'm 16 years old. I've come from Leytonstone and I'm studying at sixth form.
Hello, my name is Flora. I'm 24 years old. I'm from France, but I've been living in a lot of countries, and each time I try to get as much involved as I can. That's why I wanted to get involved with WORLDwrite, and that's why I'm here today.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm from Camberwell, South London, and I'm an aspiring documentary filmmaker.
Hi, I'm Joe. I'm 18 and I'm having a gap year and I'm unemployed, and it might be more than a gap year, I think.
It seems to me that politicians don't really seem to be trusting us much, that there's either legislation to try and regulate our behaviour or change our behaviour, or financial incentives to try and do that. So I was just kind of thinking, when are politicians going to stop asking us to trust them, and when are they going to start trusting us?
What a question. I thought it was going to be the other way around when we were talking about trust, and I think there's one of the values of what you're saying is about this whole trust issue, that it does seem to have broken down. Politicians aren't being trusted anymore because of things like the expenses scandal. But you're moving on to different territory. You're saying that the people should be trusted. So are you actually asking for sort of more liberal laws, a liberal approach to how people conduct their own lives?
I'm kind of I'm just thinking about, why is legislation always trying to change the way we live? I mean, and it's also not necessarily just about behaviour, but it's also kind of, you know, did we get a say on Europe? Are we going to get a say on Europe? And why not?
Well,
and so it's everything from the top to the bottom.
Let me say in response to that. First of all, I'm not asking you to trust me as such. I'm running on my record. As a Member of Parliament, I voted against the Iraq War, I voted against the war in Afghanistan, I'm against ID cards, I'm against the DNA database. I have a record on these issues.
Yeah,
and that, no, if you let me finish, because I listen to you. I have a record on these issues, and you have to judge the record, whether, and obviously you don't live in Hackney, but for the young ladies that live in Hackney, whether I'm the sort of person who to represent the area. But the other thing I'd say is about laws regulating behaviour. I think there are issues about civil liberties, and I've always been strong on civil liberties because when I was a little bit younger, I worked for liberty. So, for instance, I opposed a new law which would enable the government to hold people for 90 days without charge, because I thought that was onerous. And I also knew that most of the people they would lock up for 90 days without charge would be young Muslim, young ethnic minority people, because that's how the way the system works. However, there is a case for modifying people's behaviour. Just a week ago, a member of parliament, a Labour member of parliament, as it happens, a junior minister in the Foreign Office had a gay wedding at the House of Commons. He had a gay wedding in the Speaker's apartment, the House of Commons. The Leader of the House was there, the Speaker was there, and it was fine. He got a little picture of himself and his partner in the paper, and that was it. Had that happened 20 years ago, the mass media would have gone hysterical. And obviously social attitudes have changed, but the law has changed to stop people discriminating against gay people. And there is a case for the law to intervene where people's behaviour is such that it makes society, it creates problems for other people, whether it's laws against racism, whether it's laws against homophobia, whether, you know, so it's not just that you can't have any laws. If you don't have any laws, then people can behave in ways which other people find very upsetting.
I thought the question was really about, should you modify people's behaviour, because certainly there should be laws to ensure that there's equality of opportunity for people.
I think what we're really talking about here is the politics of behaviour, which is actually what New Labour openly refers to this as.
I'm not New Labour, so let's not go there.
Right, well,
let's not
and
go
also
there.
old Labour people do as well. And what they mean by the politics of behaviour is telling people what they should eat, how they should bring up their children, parenting classes. You know, you just have to look at the Change for Life adverts on TV, which are these cartoons in which children say to their mums and dads, "You're feeding me too much food, I'm going to get fat and have a heart attack." That really sums up the political elite's contempt for the masses, who they don't trust to do the most ordinary basic things in life. So it's not just that you want to use laws to control how we think ideologically, which I think is problematic, but you also want to use laws, not you necessarily, but Labour and the Conservatives have gone down the same route, want to use legislation and the politics of nudge to change how we act in our everyday lives. And I think the politics of behaviour is actually Orwellian.
I mean, that
sorry, Diane.
Sorry.
Yeah. I was going to say, it's almost a philosophical question about what the role of government is there to do, and whether government is there to, or any political party is there to say, as people, as individuals, we think you're by and large there to behave well and do good things without intervention, or whether you take an opposite approach that actually people need to be controlled and their behaviour modified in some way.
You know, I think particularly a lot of the younger generation have witnessed under Labour there's been a huge erosion of civil liberties. You know, the UK is the largest surveillance society around the world. I think that's a fact, or one of. You know, with the centralised databases, the fact, I know you're saying you're against it, and that's great. But under Labour, the slogan has been nothing to hide, nothing to fear, and yet that doesn't seem to be the case for the government. They're not transparent. And surely as a democracy, like as citizens, it's our right to be free from the government, from the constraints of the government, and that is not the case anymore.
No, in any society, you have to have a balance between personal freedom and the rule of law. I mean, you have to. When you're talking about the DNA database, for instance, it's all right to sit there and say, oh, it's terrible. What I did is I got together with the Liberty, and we had a special advice session for young people who were mostly, in fact, young black people, who were innocent, who were under 16, who had their DNA on the database. And Liberty is working with those people to get their DNA off the database. What I'm working on as a politician, because that's what politicians do, is to say we shouldn't put innocent people on the database, and we shouldn't even have guilty people's DNA on the database indefinitely. But and the reason I do that is far from being a party clone or just there to say what the Labour Party says. I take very seriously my responsibility to my constituents. And the thing about representative democracy, which people are dissing around the table, I think it was Winston Churchill who said, representative democracy is a terrible system until you consider the alternative.
However Diane tries and dresses this up, a vote for her is a vote for Labour that keeps the government in power, that's bringing in all this rubbish legislation on erosion of civil liberties. And nobody thought, I think it's fair to say, 13 years ago when Labour came to power. Nobody thought they'd get this kind of government from Labour.
Anyone who paid any serious attention to the way Labour was developing from the 1980s onwards would have known that they were going to become so authoritarian. Labour's main obsession is social control and individual control. That is its main obsession. And I think it's all very well for Diane and some of the other people around the table to talk about the quite obvious attacks on civil liberties, which we all know about, the DNA database, ID cards, stop and search, everything else. But there are other extremely Stalinist measures that have been introduced by this government which tend to get ignored, which, for example, vetting legislation, which prevents any adult from working with children without first having a criminal records background check, because the government doesn't trust adults to work with children. It thinks we are all potential paedophiles and potential kidnappers. That kind of legislation speaks volumes about the way in which the government looks at the people today, which is as an untrustworthy alien blob who need to be policed in every single relationship that they conduct. So I would like Diane and the other candidates and some of the volunteers to come out against those less obvious attacks on civil liberties, which in many ways are even more insidious and more grotesque than the kind of things that Diane has taken a stand with liberty.
I mean, in the end, because Hackney elected who they elected, and you weren't born then, but when I was first elected, a lot of people thought that a black woman could not be elected to Parliament, full stop. And local people worked really hard to make me the first black woman MP. But because Hackney's had me as an MP, I was able to work and vote across party lines, actually, on 90 days detention, and we defeated it. I mean, individual MPs can make a difference. That's my point. It's not about saying, oh, well, they're Labour. It doesn't matter who we vote for. We could vote for, you know, a man in a suit. It's all the same. Individual MPs do make a difference because that's how our system works. And that is why you come back to the thing that you have to judge a candidate as an individual. If you wanted someone to speak for the Labour Party, you should have Peter Maddison here, not me.
Diane, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, don't you think this thing about I'm only going to talk about Hackney because that's the only people I represent, don't you think it's a bit narrow? Because you're basically telling anyone who doesn't live in Hackney, I don't care what your opinions are, shut up.
No, I'm not saying
no, because people started... Anyway, but my second question, my second question, which I want you to answer, is what Brendan just brought up about vetting laws. What do you think about vetting laws? And I don't want you to sort of go, people in Hackney haven't said, oh, by the way, I'm from Hackney, and I think they're quite ridiculous. So now you can give me your opinion on the vetting laws.
Probably because I was speaking too fast. What I was saying was because that there are some people here who have the chance to vote for me, all my colleagues in the South, and some people don't. That's all. Clearly, I'm a parent, okay? And where somebody, I mean, there's been a horrible scandal that has rippled through the Catholic Church, both in Austria and America and in Ireland, which is about priests who were running youth clubs and working with young people and were paedophiles. And that was in a situation where there wasn't just an absence of vetting, but there was an assumption if you're a priest, you're a good man. So there are circumstances where as a parent, I'd want to know there'd been some sort of police check on a teacher, say.
No, but that's
I think it has gone too far. I say you don't want anyone ever checked.
That's an extremely good parallel, because the problem that the Catholic Church had with the scandal that they had was the fact that nobody was believing the parishioners who were coming forward and saying this was going on.
I was a Catholic until the age of 17, so I know a lot about the problems with the Catholic Church. One of them is not the idea that there are paedophiles running everywhere. They are a very small minority. I never encountered any. But I think that kind of comparison that both of the candidates here are making, actually, between the most extreme problems in the Catholic Church, and therefore we have to always err on the side of caution in society. That sums up the problem.
Yeah.
Diane,
hold on.
But both Labour and Conservative did make this comparison just now.
Did I say err on the side of caution?
No, but extreme forms of paedophilia in the church, which is a quite small minority, and you both use that as an example for why we need extra caution and vetting in society.
People need to be trusted, but every time there's a moral panic about things like this, when there is an incident, the government feels like it should be doing something. Right. And so there are steps forward with things like, you know, and I'll criticise the Tories, for example, the dangerous dogs legislation, which was a particularly awful piece of, but they themselves drafted a piece of legislation, not to solve the problem, but to actually look like they're solving the problem. Right. And I see that in all these, I mean, I've got a CRB check myself because I help run a youth club in South Hackney. The amount of bureaucracy that goes with trying to do that is horrendous. It actually prevents people from getting involved and doing the kind of community work that we should be encouraging people to do. And you're absolutely right, these big state solutions to what are fundamentally local problems, I hope we see the end of it when the Labour Party is kicked out of office.
Do you think that people should be penalised if they don't reduce their carbon emissions? Now, my own personal opinion on this is no, they should not be penalised, because I think this is talking about trusts and civil liberties. I think it's just another way to restrict people from having the freedom they want, for making their own choices that they want in their life. What if they don't want to carpool? What if they don't want to reduce the temperature of their washing machine? What if they don't want to switch lights on and off where they go? I think those are just a few examples, but I can just see that there's a whole sort of green fad going on that's caught on, everyone's jumping on the ideas, and in some respects I think that certain MPs believe that if they appeal to those people, they can divert from the real issues that are going on, such as the war, economy and the general state of politics. So I want to know your opinion on this.
Well, I think it's an interesting question, and yeah, if you think of penalising people in terms of fines, then yeah, that's not something that I particularly support. But actually, climate change issues are some of the biggest issues that we face globally. That's not to say that that they should win out in a contest of all other issues that we have, but actually I think to have a sensible framework where, for example, people who fly frequently are paying a heavy price in order to do so, people who use more electricity are paying a higher tariff. So I think the answer is a framework where actually you are creating a kind of a country where people are not encouraged to fly, for example, but then they're not overly penalised to do so, if you like. So
overly penalised or not penalised at all?
Well, you need something. I think this is the thing. Otherwise, where would we be? Climate change is a massive threat to this country, and we need to tackle it. We've got a responsibility as a developed nation.
I mean, absolutely, we shouldn't go around being high and mighty and fining people for their particular. If they don't want to play ball, they shouldn't have to play ball. We should live in a free society. But there is a principle about the polluter pays, and that is that if as a result of your activity you're making life worse for everyone else, then there should be a cost to you of doing that. I, for example, am absolutely horrified when I go into some of these supermarkets and you find a banana, right, a shrink-wrapped banana with the word banana written on the outside, covered in plastic. There's no levy on that plastic, so you take it out of the plastic, throw it away, that's going into landfill for absolutely no cost to that supermarket. Now, I actually think that we should be assessing the cost of our behaviour on other people in the community, and the taxation system should reflect that. But what it shouldn't be is about lecturing people to do particular things.
I'm very clear that climate change is man-made. I mean, all the evidence that I've seen points to that. I'm very clear we have to get our carbon emissions down. And actually Hackney's done quite well with recycling, green boxes, garden waste, all the rest of it.
It's the third worst in London.
Oh, well, it's better than what it was.
It's the third worst in London.
Come on, this isn't the issue we're talking about.
But what I'm conscious of, representing a constituency which is still largely working class and largely very diverse, is that people are at different stages in their understanding of the issue, and it would be penalising people if we move to a coercive system where people are punished. Because, for instance, people talk about flying overseas, but there's a lot of people in Hackney who, from Jamaica or Africa or Bengal, who save up and every 2 years go home. What are you going to say to them? You can't go home and see your nan. You can't go home for a funeral. You can't go home for a christening. Now, obviously, we have to bear down on airline travel, but I worry in a constituency like mine, because, you know, when you have globalised labour markets and people come to work in London from all over the world, there's another side to that they've got family networks all over the world, and we have to move towards bearing down on carbon emissions, but not by penalising someone that saves for 2 years to go and see their nan in Pakistan. That wouldn't be right.
The main problem in the environmental discussion isn't that people are being coerced or penalised yet. I mean, that may well happen in the future. It's that the politics of fear is being used to make people feel guilty about the things they do. And just coming back to the earlier discussion about Catholicism, it's very similar to Catholicism. You know, making people feel guilty for their everyday activities and making them pay some form of penance by recycling or offsetting their carbon by planting 7 trees or whatever else, you know, instead of saying 3 Hail Marys. But environmentalism for me is a left-wing form of the politics of fear. When I was a child in the 1980s, there was a right-wing form of the politics of fear, which was that there was going to be nuclear war, and we were all taught at school how to hide under tables, and we all had to watch that dreadful film, The Day After Tomorrow, whatever, The Day After, whatever it's called. And today, it's the new version of that is environmentalism. So you look at the government's advertising campaign on TV, where it shows a girl reading a story, being read a story by her dad in which puppies are drowning, and a local village is being subsumed by water. And it's that kind of politics of fear which really is aimed at getting into people's minds and making them feel guilty every time they take a flight, every time they drive in their car, every time they buy bananas from Kenya or whatever. And that's the problem. And we should tackle that politics of fear, because that does have a destructive impact, I think, on how people live their lives. People should do as they please. And if there is a practical problem of pollution and climate change, it ought to be dealt with at a macro level rather than micro level.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you. Adila, what do you think?
Basically, I hear everyone's opinions, but for me, I don't think that in terms of global issues, climate change is one of the most serious. I think everyone's predicting, okay, there is scientific evidence that yes, there are problems with the carbon and all that, but I think that there are other more serious issues such as poverty in the world. Other countries are not on par with us when it comes to development, and I think those issues need to be tackled, and those are the global issues we should be working towards. And when you look at back in this country and you think people are trying to control our lives and liberties and our freedoms, do something like climate change and guilt trapping people into behaving in certain ways, that really gets to me. The reason why so many people come to this country is because they believe that they have the freedom, they believe that this country offers answers and solutions, and so yes, when they tell no, you can't fly home because of this, or you have to pay a higher flights rates for that, or you can't get different products from different countries because of the carbon emissions, that is the real problem there.
I think it's time for us to actually address the biggest elephant in the room, which is, are you all for pulling the troops out of Afghanistan? And if so, when?
Yes, I think we should pull out of Afghanistan, and I think we should do it now. And I think we should do it for the right reasons. I don't think we should do it because our boys are being harmed there, which is the main argument that is made now. We should do it because it is morally and politically wrong for a British or an American army to occupy another country. It's anti-democratic, it interferes with other people's sovereign rights. And the main thing I think we should challenge on this issue is the idea that these are fundamentally American wars which Britain has been duped into. I think we really need to challenge that idea, because I think the Afghan war and the Iraq war really spring from Blair's ethical imperialism that he launched in 1997, and which he really kicked off with the Kosovo intervention in 1999. These are the logical conclusion to that. So I really want to distance from the idea that Britain is just the puppy dog of this evil American empire, and recognise the fact that New Labour provided the logic and the momentum and the political justification for these rather barbaric wars.
I visited Afghanistan, I visited the troops in Afghanistan last year, and I actually stayed in a camp, in a tent with the troops, and I was very struck by how brave they are and committed to what they're doing. But I voted against the Afghanistan war, and nothing I saw when I went out there has made me think I made the wrong vote. I think it is a war which can't be won. Historically, no imperial power has ever subdued the people of Afghanistan because they're there in the middle of the sort of Himalayan range, and they're very good at defending their own land. I think it's a war which can't be won. And without sounding technical, if the answer to your question is a neo-colonialist war, then you have asked the wrong question. We cannot win that war. We should not be there. And the thing that struck me, talking to ordinary soldiers, which I did a lot when I was out there, not just the official military briefings, is we went from initially being seen as an army of liberation to being seen as an army of occupation. And as someone whose parents came from a colony, I know what that is. We have to come out.
I think the trouble is there's no strategy for being there in the first place. I'm a project manager by day, and one of the things I know is when you try and deliver change, your first question should be, what does success look like? What is it I want to get out of this ultimately? Not to a low level of detail perhaps, but at least know what you're trying to get out of it. And that's the fundamental thing that we're missing in Afghanistan. Diane's right, I mean, there's a track record, there's a long history going back on failure in Afghanistan. And I think military intervention should be the very last thing you ever possibly conceive you're going to do, because all other avenues have been explored. I think it's an utter shame that we're there without a strategy in the first place. I think it's bigger than just say troops in or troops out.
Thanks.
It goes back to Robin Cook and this idea of an ethical foreign policy. The thing about a foreign policy is that Britain's foreign policy, the prime directive should be to further the interests of Britain. And I know that sounds very selfish and it sounds like I'm arguing against ethics, but what on earth should a British foreign policy be unless it's to further the interests of Britain? You know, what other job has it got in the world? Unfortunately, because of this ethical foreign policy, whereby we took on all the woes of the world, and this little nation of 1%, less than 1% population, decided to solve all the problems for the rest of the world. And I think what happened with Afghanistan is I do believe that they should have gone into Afghanistan. I don't believe they should have gone into Iraq, but for very clear reasons. Quite unquestionably, Afghanistan was the home of the Taliban, who were hosting Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda had
they were put
there
with the help of Thatcher.
Yes, absolutely, and it's
so it didn't happen before your lifetime.
Yeah,
it happened in our lifetime.
Yeah, but that's why I'm saying that it should be about the British national interest, and that
So you say Thatcher intervened in Afghanistan and supported the Mujahideen, which was against British interests.
We're talking
right?
about
because now you say we have to go there and take them out.
I'm not going to make the arguments for Margaret Thatcher. All I'm saying is that what the situation is now. Let's talk about now.
We do need to recognise that the Conservatives cannot sit here and pretend to be anti-imperialists and criticise Labour as if they are the only imperialists. I mean, look at the Falklands War, Thatcher's interventions in Afghanistan, the first Gulf War, which was also launched...
Well, we could go into an argument about...
which was also launched for humanitarian reasons, supposedly. The first Gulf War. It wasn't to liberate the people of Kuwait.
It was British national interest.
No, it was about liberating the people
British territory.
Lauren.
Being unemployed myself and being on the JSA, Job Seekers Allowance, for 5 months, I'm sure you're all aware that my concerns are youth unemployment. Seems to be plenty of schemes being initiated, Future Jobs Fund, the New Deal, backing Young Britain. Where are the jobs? You know, there's these placements, there's these 6-month placements that people are introducing, the government are introducing youth unemployed to, that doesn't guarantee a job at the end of it. The Office of National Statistics, they released figures last month about youth unemployment in Hackney, and the figures were outstanding. 21.4% of 18 to 24-year-olds are unemployed. So what I want to know is, basically, you know, what do you propose to do about getting people back into employment?
Fundamentally, the way to get people back into employment is to give them opportunities to get back into employment, to ensure that the economy is generating enough jobs that people have those opportunities. And whilst they have this scheme, that scheme, and all the other schemes that are thrown at everybody to persuade people that they're doing something about it, the fundamental root cause is that there's not the economic activity taking place. And we've seen the psychology of the current government at the moment, with this idea that it's perfectly all right to increase national insurance, for example, and yet national insurance is one of those job-destroying measures. And for as long as the government thinks it can solve all the problems of unemployment on its own, it will fail, because actually the people who provide sustainable jobs are the people who are innovating, the entrepreneurs, the small companies, and they're the ones who are being most stitched up by the current economic situation. That's the fundamental. We can talk in detail about particular schemes and how actually some of those schemes are a disincentive to actually get jobs. But at the end of the day, if the jobs aren't out there, no amount of government schemes is going to get you employed.
So how do you propose then that the Conservatives are going to encourage and assist, because so far all they've said is that they're going to be slashing public spending. So how are you going to be supporting the unemployed?
Because in order to get to where we need to be in the economy in the quickest possible space of time, we've got to address the confidence issue, and the international investors throughout the world are looking at Britain and saying, look, they've got this enormous debt and they're not doing anything about it.
Thanks, Andrew.
Well, I think Andrew's proving that as a politician he's trying to pull the wool over people's eyes, which you can do some of the time, but you can't all the time. And sorry, I'll respond to the question in a sec, but this is really annoying. We're getting this Conservative approach that's trying to pretend that we can just cut NI national insurance, and this can be found through some magic efficiency savings to the tune of billions and billions. It's pie in the sky. So, yeah, the deficit issue needs to be addressed. commonly, generally accepted that now is not the right time to do it. It may lead to a double-dip recession. Shake your head all you like. I mean, that's what the majority view is. In relation to unemployment, it has to be about, I agree with Andrew on this, about providing some of those opportunities at a local level. The Olympics is a great example of where that's attempted to be done with a degree of success, but not nearly as successful as it could have been. You can't have scheme after scheme trying to get people into work when the jobs aren't there in the first place.
Well, the first thing we need to do in relation to youth unemployment is to be honest about it, and I don't think any of the political parties are being honest about it. The Tories massage the youth unemployment figures by shoving all these young people onto YTS schemes. Labour massaged the youth unemployment figures by shoving everyone into these kind of new universities and giving them pretty much worthless degrees, which were not the standard of education that Labour ministers have had. And so I think we need to be honest about where the problem lies and how we're going to address it. And it strikes me that none of the parties have got any big visions for the economic problems afflicting this country, as summed up by the fact that there is a severe recession on. The only thing they can talk about is whether we need an age of austerity or more cuts or whether national insurance should be brought up or not. That is the level of the discussion.
So
there is no seriousness.
What's your
no, we need a serious discussion about where the economic...
No. We need a serious discussion. It's a way of getting out from actually venturing opinion.
Where the economic problems stem from. I don't think we can just go around blaming bankers and blaming greed and blaming people for buying houses and too many things they couldn't afford. Systemically, where do the economic problems come from? And once we've worked that out, we can decide what we ought to do.
But you're not suggesting what they are.
Well, we might want to restructure the economy. We might want to organise the economy in a different way. We might want to emphasise manufacturing and innovation rather than what Gordon Brown and others have been doing for the past 10 years, which is emphasising finance and casino-style economics. So there are lots of things, but we need to first be honest about the problem and to have a higher level of debate rather than this kind of extreme petty forms of firefighting, which only puts out the fire here, but then it starts somewhere else.
This is the
Thanks, Andrew. Diane.
The majority of people that work in Hackney work in the public sector, particularly women. They work in schools and hospitals, the local authority, different things like Sure Start. The majority of people that work in Hackney work in the public sector. That is why the Tory proposals to cut the public sector are so dangerous, because one man's public expenditure cut is another woman's job. And what will happen under Tory, but they're saying, oh, we're going to save money in the public sector. There will be fewer jobs in Hackney. The council and everybody else will have to cut that. I would say this, my own view is clearly there is a gap that has to be filled, but I don't see why young people looking for jobs should pay the price of the billions we had to put in, I'm afraid, to bail out
but
bankers.
ultimately, Diane, who pays for those job schemes?
I'm not talking about job schemes. What I'm saying is, in Hackney, there are jobs for people to do. I'm going to schools where they're frightened they're going to have to lay off teaching assistants and lay off teachers because of coming cuts. And I think there's been a huge missed opportunity with the Olympics. Do you know, on the whole Olympics out, there's only one apprentice from Hackney, just one.
Yes.
And don't ask me how many ethnic minorities. I think more could be done with the Olympics to bring jobs to Hackney, and we need to sustain the levels of public sector employment. Because in the public sector, they're doing things that people need.
The problem of unemployment has been really severely depoliticised, which I think is why young people are so frustrated, because there are no longer meaningful outlets for them to protest about this problem, to take action. And the reason unemployment has been depoliticised goes right back to the Tories in the 80s and then Labour in the 90s, where there has been this process where unemployment has been naturalised, if you like. It's been turned into a normal part of society. For example, the redefinition of unemployed people as incapable through incapacity benefit, where millions of people overnight were basically turned into people who are unwell and therefore should not expect to work, rather than people who've been shortchanged by society. It has, and through that process, well, that's why in a recession, well, why else in this recession are there so few strikes? There are a handful, but they're notable because they're so rare. So few people marching through the streets, which there were in the 80s. And 70s and the 60s. And I think it's because unemployment has been taken out of the political sphere through the actions of both the Tories and Labour, which has left young people with no jobs feeling extremely isolated and frustrated and not knowing what to do about it. So there is also the additional problem of, I think we need to re-politicise the issue of unemployment, turn it back into a serious political issue, and the economy itself, turn that back into a serious political issue, rather than leaving it to experts or to financial authorities and other groups, which is what the new Labour government did, shifted the economic debate out of the political sphere, made the Bank of England independent, and turned it into a rarefied discussion. We need to get it back into the public.
I just wanted to ask, I'm 16 and I'm studying at sixth form and I'm studying politics. So I do know a bit about the political parties before, because people think some youth are not like educated in politics and stuff. But I just wanted to say, I think it's undeniable that the political parties are becoming more and more similar. So I wanted, this is mainly for the leaders of the parties, not leaders, but yeah. What makes you who you are? Who are you? What defines you? And yeah, what is your vision? I don't really want to hear about like little policies like taxes and education policies. I just want to know, what do you want to do for Britain?
Okay.
We have political parties that end up so similar. It's because we have a political system that's so broken and unrepresentative of the people. This dreadful first past the post system that Diane voted to keep against 297 of her Labour counterparts. Not surprising, because Diane got elected on a minority vote, 14,000 people out of 107,000 constituents. That's an aside. Well, I got involved in politics about 3 or 4 years ago. I'm not a lifelong sort of political animal. Motivated by my partner mainly to tell me to stop shouting at the TV and get off my backside and actually do something and get out there and make a difference. And my big motivation has been driven by a couple of bigger issues to do with people's individual freedoms and their civil liberties. And it's really narked me over the last dozen or so years to see those gradually being eroded. Civil liberties, these essential freedoms that we have. If you don't have them, what have you got? These are some of the most basic freedoms that we need to have and we need to protect. And they're the easiest ones to get, as legislation, to get attacked in Parliament through knee-jerk legislation, which is the worst kind of legislation. So my motivation in the first place is on a couple of those bigger issues.
My parents left school at 14. I wanted to change the world. I wanted to do something which people had not seen a black woman do before. And I wanted to show it could be done. And I wanted to say to myself when I turned 40 that I could look in the mirror and say, well, I tried. And that's all I can tell you. I can't tell you I changed the world, but I can tell you I tried. And I tried to do something which had not been done. And I always, whatever comes before Parliament, whether it's dangerous dogs, whether it's the Olympics, whether it's Afghanistan, where I look at my constituents, who are very much people who no one else speaks for, and say, what would they want? What would be right for them?
Andrew?
I think the difference about me, I would never criticise Diane for, or politics anyway, or a party on the basis of they're all awful and they want to do us all bad. They actually believe that what they're doing is good for people. But the difference between us and the Conservative Party and the Labour Party is they want to do good from the top down and we want to try and do good from the bottom up. And that's really the different view that we have in politics.
The parties do look very similar to most ordinary people. I mean, we see them talking about small issues rather than big issues, and that does concern a lot of potential voters. But I think the real problem today is that the political class looks to most of us like an oligarchy. It's extremely cut off from the public. It seems to have very little interaction with us. It doesn't understand us, as evidenced by all the various policies it puts forward for controlling our behaviour and controlling the way we think and limiting our speech. It sees us as a problem to be controlled rather than as a group of people to be listened to and actually paid attention to. And I think that's really going to be confirmed with this election, because we're going to have a new breed of leader after this election. All the people coming to the fore now who were born in the late 1960s, who got into politics in the 90s after the collapse of left and right. So this election is going to really copper fasten the rise of an oligarchy that has very little understanding of or interaction with the public, I think.
Yeah, I've been researching Sylvia Pankhurst at the moment, and I'm really inspired by her kind of vision and her quest for universal suffrage. However, I'm really not compelled to vote in this coming election, and something like 56% of 18 to 25-year-olds haven't even registered to vote. I just want to know why you think this is, and also, do you think we have a duty to vote as UK citizens?
Andrew, you look pretty shocked there.
If I was to say to you, I can't stand you, you're stupid. You're stupid. That's a stupid question. Do you think you might get out to vote against me?
That's completely
beside
the point.
It isn't the point, because if I was an awful person, not voting is exactly the same as voting for the person you least want to have representing you. Because unless you vote, Somebody else is making that decision.
Yeah, but why should that?
So to keep the baddie.
You're saying that there's nothing for me to vote for. You're saying just vote against the party you dislike. I want to vote for someone that I believe in.
I really have an issue with people who don't vote, because they're all saying that we three parties should get together and try and make it different for you. You've got to be big enough to make a decision. In life, there are choices.
I can make decisions.
Well, to vote against me, because there are you have the choices.
You think not voting is not a decision?
You've got to make the choice.
Thank you.
Andrew, that is just arrogant, I'm afraid.
It's not arrogant.
Well, just to say, vote because you've got to choose for
even
the
if
least
you've got to
worst
vote,
option.
Andrew.
Or actually say, well, actually, no, vote for something positive. Even though
I'm sick and tired of abstentions.
But for a long time, you've had young people who say they're not voting, they're not going to vote, they're not sin, da 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 da. In 1994, I went out to South Africa as an international observer for the first democratic elections I'd ever had in South Africa. And I flew into Johannesburg, and then early on election day, like 6 in the morning, I went out to Soweto, which is way on the outskirts of Johannesburg. It's not a ghetto like Hackney, it's way on the outskirts. And you know, I got to Soweto at 6 in the morning, and there are people that have been queuing there to vote for hours. And when they opened the polling station, because this was Soweto, it's a black township, when they walked up to the box, because they had this long ballot paper, and they put it in the box, because I was the observer, so I was watching them, very often they would turn around, as if even at this point, someone was going to say to them, you, black person, you can't vote, and they cast their vote. And you know, that's ingrained on me. People, you know, people died to vote. I don't tell people, you will notice, no, listen, let me finish. I don't tell people to vote Labour, and I'm not. I mean, if Tony Blair was here or Gordon Brown was here, they'd be shocked at some things I'm saying. But what I say to people, I just want you to use your vote. If you want to vote for Andrew, do that. But use your vote, because people died.
Okay, thanks.
No, what Andrew and Diane are saying in different ways is effectively political blackmail. If you don't vote, you're denigrating the memory of Sylvia. Wait, this is exactly what you're saying. This is exactly what you just said. If you don't vote,
exactly what Diane just said.
If you don't vote, you're denigrating the memory of Sylvia Pankhurst. If you don't vote, you're insulting all those black South Africans who fought for so long for the right to vote. The fact is, black South Africa in 1994 and the suffragettes in the early 1900s didn't fight for the right to choose between Lib Dem policy on DNA databases and Conservative policy on national insurance. They fought, in fact, Sylvia Pankhurst was also one of my heroes. Whenever she referred to the vote, she always used the capital V, because for her the vote wasn't just, she said this, not just a technical thing of filling in a ballot paper. It was a way of extending people's control and power over the way in which the country is run and over the way in which decisions are made. She was also a complete outspoken opponent against controlling population control, against reducing production. She would have been a critic of environmentalism, I'm certain. So I think we need to recognise that these people died for the vote with a capital V, which was a way of expressing their desires and their subjectivity and impacting their own worldview onto democracy. That's what they fought for. No one, and these young people are absolutely right to say, I will not die. We have the right to vote.
Brendan, thank you, Andrew.
Why would I
Lauren.
die for the right to vote?
Right, Lauren. Is it the stupidest opinion?
It
or are
is
you,
the stupidest.
Andrew?
I just personally think if there is a party that represents you and you agree with their policies, then you vote for them. If there's nobody that represents you, why should you have the duty to vote?
Can I just say something? That when people in Hackney and when young people don't vote, do you know what happens? Professional politicians don't take them seriously. There is a reason that year after year, both our parties are chasing the middle ground in Middle England, because they rely on people like you not voting. That's why I'd rather you use your vote.
You live in London. It's for it's just for, and I'm sorry to be so offensive, but I really have got problems with this name. It's because of people like yourself that I now sit. It's because of abstentions that I now sit on the London Assembly with a Nazi.
You're blaming your political failures and your party's failures on the people.
I'm blaming
Sal.
Okay, I've got a question. It's about, so the UK Department for International Development, otherwise known as DFID, gives millions of pounds every year in foreign aid, but a huge percentage of that money goes to the British NGOs and the consultants. And so what my question would be is, I mean, isn't it just better if we just scrap DFID and hand over the cash to the people who actually need it and let them do with it what they will?
I do think, because I'm registered in Northampton, Federal with Africa and the Caribbean and broader, but far too much money goes to actually British consultants, who in fact could not work here if they came back here. But I think one of the reasons why DFID tries to channel money through NGOs is if they give the money to governments, the money certainly won't reach ordinary people. There is a I understand what you're saying.
So this
certainly, I
is,
deplore the use of consultants, but it's quite tricky in some countries
so
to make sure that money isn't misused or doesn't go to one party rather than another party. That's all I would say.
I think that's absolutely right. I think it's the NGOs are being used for precisely the reason that you stated, I think. Now, I'd like to see some other mechanism where you could guarantee that the aid that is given is going to the people that it's actually directed at. Now, currently, the NGOs are probably the best mechanism of bypassing government.
An anti-democratic mechanism.
Oh, it is anti-democratic.
We've got to make sure that the money gets to the people, and whatever mechanism is there, we need to do it.
Millions of
but certainly
so you're talking about corruption, basically, right? Corruption.
Not just they're effectively saying, by the sounds of things, they don't trust African leaders to run their countries, and therefore we need white people from the West who are more trustworthy to do it. You have just said we need to find ways to bypass governments, and the way to do that is to fund these Western NGOs to do
Diane.
work.
No, come on. No.
You're saying we need to bypass governments in the third world. Anyway, the point is that the idea that you would trust these kind of NGOs to make any kind of serious impact for the better in those kind of countries is ridiculous. If you just look at the work of someone like Oxfam, 2 years ago, Oxfam had a campaign at Christmas which was called Give an African the Gift of Dung, right? And what you could do, you could give £25 to Oxfam and they would give dung to Africans with which they could grow food and fertilise crops and everything else. In the same year that Oxfam did that, China, for example, built thousands of miles of roads, thousands of miles of railways, funded the construction of factories, funded the construction of universities and hospitals in return for natural resources. Obviously, we all know that. But the difference between those two approaches speaks volumes about the problem with NGOs, which is they have small-scale ideas, low horizons, they are exceptionally patronising, they're more interested in controlling how the people in the third world live their lives and how many children they have, rather than giving them things that we have over here. I would say don't give any money to those NGOs. They are the ones who are morally corrupt, if not politically and institutionally corrupt. Give the money directly to African communities and let them decide.
The problem is when you start to explore the alternatives of saying, actually, you don't want the system of NGOs, and say, well, okay, what's the alternative if we didn't have any of that, of actually giving the money direct to governments, sometimes run by dictators, and seeing that money siphoned off to feather their own nest and not go to where the desperately needed aid money needs to get to. No one's pretending it's a perfect system, but the alternative is much worse.
I'm talking about local NGOs, and actually, when you have like the earthquake in Haiti, you had to have NGOs go in there because the government had collapsed. Sometimes you do need an NGO, whether it's local or external, particularly when you have a tsunami or earthquake or something like that. I understand what you're saying because I know people resent Western consultants and they resent Western NGOs, but there is a reason, and I think the important thing is to develop local NGOs. But there is a reason why people don't want to give money directly to government. If all the money that had been poured into, let's say, Haiti, well no, Haiti's not a good example, but if all the money had been poured in some of those countries had actually reached poor people, some of those countries would have been poor today.
Okay, so you are talking about corruption, okay? We're talking about development aid. Yeah, because you're saying that, you know, governments in the developing countries can't be trusted with the money that we get. Yeah, of course that's what you're saying.
Well, no, I was told to keep it brief.
Okay, here you go. Andrew says that. Right, but what I want to say is China, right, is considered one of the most corrupt countries in the world, according to Transparency International's index. Yet its development is happening, it's big, it's dynamic, and you know it's brought millions out of poverty. So this link between corruption and which I think is such an excuse for the lack of development in some parts of the world. So the link between corruption and lack of development, I think, is such an obviously empty argument.
That's all we've got time for here on Question Dine here this evening. Thank you very much to our prospective parliamentary candidates and Brendan. Thank you to all our young volunteers, and thank you very, very much to the E5 Square Cafe here in Hackney. Thanks for watching. Please feel free to post your comments below on any of the issues we've been talking about here tonight, and let's see if we can't re-enfranchise the political debate around the election.
Yeah.
silly thing if you have